Welcome to our EQC speaker series, Landscaping with Native Plants. Prior to beginning, I have a few announcements. One of them is Green Community Awards. The deadline is June 8th, and the EQC hosts the Green Community Awards annually to recognize individual and corporate efforts in 3 areas: water, energy, and general initiative. General initiative includes things like community gardens, beekeeping, anything else that improves our community and environment. I encourage you to submit yourselves or other people that you know, encourage them to submit an application. And then after the Landscape with Native Plants, on June 2nd at Shepherd of the Hills Church, they're having a native plant sale. And hopefully we'll have some of your plants, or?
I am retired.
Okay. And now I'll introduce our guest speaker, Nancy Schumacher. Nancy's been growing and selling native plants through her home business at farmers markets and special events for over 30 years. Nancy holds a degree in soil science from the University of Minnesota. Prior to operating her own small business, Nancy worked as a soil mapper in Stearns County and spent several years in both research and consulting on organic waste management. Nancy and her husband currently own 50 acres of property. They've established a conservation easement on this property and are working with Dakota County to return it to a more natural state. Please welcome Nancy Schumacher.
Okay, so when I do these talks, I tend to forget things all the time. So lest I forget, I'm not going to wait until the end. I'd like to mention that on the podium back there, there's a couple of handouts. One is additional information on the sale that Kathy mentioned. And the other one is a handout that I created with Minnesota Wild Ones, which is a native plant group. It's a nonprofit national group. And they wanted a handout specifically on milkweeds that will grow in Minnesota. And knowing that milkweeds were one of my big passions, along with the monarch butterflies, I helped to author that. I have a lot of them at home, and as I said, I'm retired now, so if I think I have a captive audience, I bring them along. The other thing that I tend to forget, and sometimes I've asked to give resources, and this time I wasn't, but I thought, hey, so if, are we all gardeners? Yeah? Okay. How about gardeners with gardening with native plants? Okay, so some, yeah. So, as I went along my journey, the 2 pieces of information that I found most useful to me, and I love to read, I love to research, I know that that's not everybody's cup of tea, but this is a book by a gentleman named William Kalina, and he has a series of them. This one is on wildflowers. There's one on trees, shrubs, and vines, and I believe he also has one on things like ferns and mosses and lichens and stuff. He is amazingly knowledgeable. He heads up the New England Wildflower Center, and a joy to read, just a joy to read. I mean, there are pieces of this I've gone back and read over. He's just got a voice that speaks to me, and I think to a lot of people. So widely available at libraries. They're not cheap books, but yeah, really worth it. Yes?
What's his name again?
William Kalina. And you know what? I will set these right here, and if somebody wants to come up and look at them afterwards. The other thing, believe it or not, that I really have used a lot over the years is, are people aware of Prairie Moon Nursery in Winona, Minnesota? They're a native plant nursery, pretty well known in the native plant circles. And they put out a catalog every year. That is just an amazing source of information. I always, to this day, have their current catalog at my bedside. So, I mean, it's going to, and if you want to do plant selections, the way their information is organized is just really, really helpful. So, I've got those two pieces out of the way, and now we can, let's see, he said F5. I kind of tried to tell him escape, F5. I need a helper. I told you this was going to happen.
You're close. It's right down here.
Okay, great.
There you go.
Thank you. I actually told Doug this would probably happen. And this is a good place for me to say that I have been half of the business. I grow all of the plants. I grew all of the plants. My husband, Jim Sipe, was a gentleman who took care of my carpentry, electricity, mechanical stuff, plumbing, accounting, and provided health care insurance, too, so that I could pursue my dreams. So I always have to give a shout out to him. And this is the first time I've ever given a presentation where he hasn't accompanied me to tell me what to do here. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but there you go. So before I start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my journey, because I think, I hope it's a little bit inspirational. How's that? So when I met my husband, he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I was 28 years old. I was already, well employed. And I said, "I want to be a farmer when I grow up." I said, I was born knowing that someday I would need to be a grower. I knew that, being something like a farmer on a quarter section of land or a section of land was not within the realm of possibility, so I was thinking something like a truck farmer, like maybe tomatoes and peppers or something like that. And then I thought, oh my God, that's going to be a lot of heavy lifting. So I think I'm going to grow plants. I don't know what I was thinking, because that's a lot of heavy lifting too. But so I started growing plants, and on the back deck and in little cold frames in my backyard. And by the second year, I had too many plants. And so then I hit the farmer's market. And I actually fell in love with the farmer's market. I was in downtown St. Paul for I believe 30 years at the farmer's market there. And the way I approached it was to look around and try to figure out what is somebody else not doing. And what I didn't see a lot of was perennial flowers. And so, for a number of years, I did perennial flowers, herbs, and what I at that time called wildflowers. And I was lucky enough to stumble onto this company in Winona, Minnesota, that would be Prairie Moon, who sold wildflower seeds in quantities for a grower, small enough for a grower like me. And it just kind of evolved from there. And I think over the years, I eventually started decreasing the amount of more traditional things that I grew and up the amount of native plants that I grew. I was also growing cut flowers, and so a lot of the plants that I was growing for sale, I was planting into my own acreage, and I started to realize that the places where the most stuff was going on were the places where I was growing the native plants. There were the most bees there were the most butterflies there were the most birds there, and I said, this is how I want to go. I actually dropped the cut flowers shortly after then, because I thought, native plants are a much better deal. And the whole process really changed the way I looked at plants, the way I looked at gardening. And I find myself now, I look at gardens that other people might think are messy or chaotic, and I think, oh my God, it's so exuberant, it's so happy, and I know that there's lots of stuff living there. There's lots of things going on in that garden. I look at formal gardens, and I think they're really beautiful. I think they're, they can be an amazing piece of design work and stuff, but I'll look at them and I say, I know that there's not as much stuff living there. There's not as many happy creatures in that garden. So I encourage you all to take that journey, and I think your aesthetic can change too. What you might have thought was messy a couple years ago, in a couple years from now, you might think that's just great. That's just great. There's a lot of happy things going on. So, from there, first we should define native plant, which is one that was growing naturally in a specific area before white or European settlement. And I kind of look at native plants as kind of a spectrum. So on one end would be local genotypes, and a local genotype means that it's not only a native plant, it's native to this area, probably not Wisconsin. I mean, if it's in Wisconsin but not here, the purists would say that's not a native plant here. I'm not quite that much of a purist, but I think if you're doing a hardcore restoration, there's a really appropriate place for local genotypes. On the other end of the spectrum would be things like cultivars, or I've heard the name nativar being coined now, which means that they've taken native species and they've bred them to have what many, but maybe not all of us, would consider more desirable characteristics or unique characteristics, such as like bright orange, purple coneflowers, improved varieties of native grasses, things like that. Those are the things that I'm referring to when I speak of cultivars. I am not particularly fond of native cultivars because I think quite often things are lost in the breeding process, and generally what's lost has got to do with the reproductive capability of the plant, and that which has to do with the reproductive capability of the plant means the flower, the nectar, the pollen, all of the reasons that we want to be growing native plants can, I'm not sure that they always are, but they are often tampered with or diminished when you get into cultivars. So, and like I said, I think, for restoration work, you definitely want to be on the farther, more pure end of the spectrum. In the home garden, I cut people a lot of slack. Categories of natives. There's forbs, which are flowers, and I don't know why we can't call them flowers, but we call them forbs. Grasses and sedges, and then there's woody plants, which includes trees, shrubs, and a handful of woody vines. And then there's things like ferns, mosses, lichens, and whatnot. Okay, so why grow natives? They're adapted to local conditions. They are amongst the toughest plants that you could possibly put in your garden. They're not likely to become invasive. A lot, and there are a few that I would strongly recommend, natives, that I would say, no, do not plant that. First and foremost on my mind is Canadian goldenrod. It's just much too aggressive of a plant. But for the most part, even some of those that I describe as being somewhat exuberant, if they're in competition with other plants, they create a sort of checks and balances with each other so that they don't take over like some of the noxious weeds will. Excuse me. They require less water and fertilizer. I generally tell people if you're planting native plants, you water them to establish them in the first year that you plant them. Other than that, unless you're like looking at a drought situation, they should be okay. Fertilization, very rarely, particularly with the prairie species or the dryland species, the open sun species. Some of the woodland species, because their natural environment is more of an organic, rich, moist situation, fertilization may be beneficial in some of those species. Native plants attract wildlife, and that includes insects, pollinators, birds, rodents too, but kind of learn to live with some of that. There are lots of excellent species for shaded areas. Whenever I speak in a mature city like Shoreview, and I mean mature, it's not a new community. I don't mean you're all old here. But I know that there's lots of shaded lots in the city, and so I really like to emphasize you have options with natives here. And contrary to, I think, what some people believe, they don't need to look weedy. So, as I said, adapted to local conditions. They can tolerate harsh climatic conditions. And this is true of the ones that are native just to here, to the state of Minnesota, as well as, say, some of those that might be native into Wisconsin or Iowa or some of our adjoining states, but, you know, their natural range doesn't extend into Minnesota. Most of those plants are still going to be really quite hardy. Not likely to be invasive, which is an opportunity for me to ramble off a list of plants that I just cringe when I hear people say they want Queen Anne's lace in their garden or something like that. But these are some examples of exotics that have been brought here, and I believe that all of these were brought here as ornamentals, and these are all really problematic plants in our environment now. I think most people know about the purple loose strife. You know, one that I don't have listed here, do folks know what Dame's rocket is? No? Okay. What's it also called? Rocket or, yeah, whatever. It's another one I should have on the list. It's become particularly problematic in recent years also. Having said that, some of the natives can be, as I like to say, exuberant. But there are tools that you can use to control those that are likely to self-sow or spread. Fertilizing and overwatering should be avoided, as I mentioned, particularly with the prairie and other dryland species. In general, woodland species benefit from more moisture and fertility. I want to go back to this fertilization and overwatering. You know, there's a lot of particularly prairie plants that if you take them and put them in a garden and you over-fertilize them, what's going to happen is they're likely to flop over. They're going to get bigger than you want them to. So if you think about a prairie environment, which is a very concentrated, very competitive plant environment, so they're competing for moisture, they're competing for nutrients, so they don't really have the same opportunity to get really big and lush and fall over. So what you want to do is don't fertilize them. Don't give them, you know, super rich conditions, because then you're going to end up needing to stake more plants, basically. Native plants attract wildlife. I think that this message has really kind of gotten out there in the public now. So I don't know that I need to say a whole lot here, but I do like to remind people that even woody things like bushes provide a lot of berry, they provide cover. There are butterfly larvae who live or feed on leaves of, you know, even things like prickly ash, believe it or not, hackberry trees, yeah, and they provide shelter. And that's particularly true of some of the grasses. They provide good shelter for a lot of the pollinators. They can, you know, in bad climatic conditions and in cold, they can hunker down in there and keep themselves warm and free from the hurricane, I guess. Okay, so I always like to point out to people, if you're trying to create, you know, just a native planting on the back 40 or something like that, go wild. But if you are trying to incorporate native species into a, you know, a more traditional or structured garden, then I think it's useful to pay attention to the same design elements that you would use in planning a more traditional garden. And I think the most important thing that you do is make it look intentional. I mean, it can look wacko, but if it looks like you meant it to be wacko, it shows, it really shows that, oh, somebody designed this way. You can add focal features like paths, sculptures, hardscaping birdhouses, and bird baths. And I really encourage people to use your imagination. I think a garden is, it's a piece of work. It's a piece of your artwork. It's a piece of personal expression. And you should, when I sold plants for years, people would say, well, how many of these should I plant? How should I put these? And I go, now, come on. This is your painting. I want you to figure out, I can kind of give you some ideas, but I want you to be creative about this process because I do believe gardens are really a form of creation. Okay, the only management tool I'm going to talk about here is shearing. I do another whole separate talk on how to manage natives, but this one I think is really important. Deadheading to prevent self-sowing. This is useful, particularly with those things that produce a lot of seeds, like asters and goldenrods. The coneflowers I'm a little bit ambivalent on because the birds do like the seeds. So I stopped shearing them about 10 years ago, and I deal with 1 million little seedlings every spring. But if you get them when they're young, they're just like any other little weed. So one thing I do, which, and I find that I probably do this more in my shade beds and in the sunny beds, is to cut them to the ground after flowering. This will kind of give them a fresh flush of foliage. Some of them can look kind of ratty after they've bloomed, and I just like that clean foliage coming back. Yeah, all of these. These are all, well, the spiderwort's more of a sun guy, but the wood poppy, Jacob's ladder, and wild geranium. I have the 3 of them together in a garden in the back. When they're all done blooming, I literally go over the top of it with a weed whip, and 2 weeks later, it looks nice and clean again. So it's not going to bloom again. And this is some serious deadheading. I wanted to put this in here because this is a whole, I have some other pictures of, this is Susan Damon's garden. She's on Cleveland Avenue in St. Paul. Amazing gardener. I don't think she has a square inch of grass on her property. Maybe a path, I don't know. But this is actually her boulevard planting. And this guy that she has back here, this silvery plant, it's a seedy devil. So she lets it bloom and then she cuts it back. You can see here she's cut it back just about halfway. So it's going to regrow and look nice. But she's gotten rid of the seed source there so that it would otherwise eat this whole boulevard. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to, I have quite possibly 100 pictures here. At some point, somebody will just have to stop me. So, but I wanted, like I said, I wanted to make sure we talked about shade species. And I think what's nice about some of the natives is you can find natives that will grow in a drier shade situation, which is, that can be a challenge. Can really be a challenge. I think if you're going to garden in the shade, one must need to learn to appreciate foliage and how to work with foliage to create nice foliage combinations. A lot of the things that grow in the deep shade are either spring ephemerals, or they have pretty brief bloom periods. A lot of them bloom in the spring. So I really encourage people to think about your foliage in there and think about the texture. There's good things you can do. Or as I like to say, think outside the hosta. Yeah. Speaking of think outside the hosta, this is wild ginger. Does anybody have this plant? Yeah, great plant. It can be aggressive, but here's a plant that will grow in dry shade, and it forms just a beautiful carpet. Can be a ground cover in a shaded area. Yes, it does have a flower, but you'll never see it. It's kind of a little, maybe a marble size, unappealing, about the color of this carpet. Hangs beneath the leaves. They're blooming right now, actually, or close to blooming right now, I think, yeah. But it's just a really adaptable and attractive plant. This is another one that can be used as a ground cover. This is bishop's cap. It's in the saxifrage family, which makes it a relative of things like the heucheras, coral bells. So it's kind of got that nice, low mounding. Mine is blooming right now. It is a spring bloomer. This is one that I think tends to look pretty good all season. I don't shear this one at all. It just stays nice and low and quite attractive. And it's really interesting because this is so early. I mean, because it's blooming right now and not a lot of other things are blooming. It's just, boy, there's just so much activity going on. And it's not like it's that floriferous, but there's just lots of little bees and insects aren't my strong point. But I know that there's a lot of different little insects that are feeding on this right now. Yes. So here's some ginger and some ferns, and this is bellwort. Does anybody have this plant? Oh, he's got all of this. This is, oh gosh, it's so sweet. This is, I like to put this in here so we can talk about the spring ephemerals. These are plants that come up. They generally bloom fairly early in the spring. Once the terrible heat sets in, they go completely to die back completely. So you basically, you think the plant's dead, but it's not. It's just, it doesn't take the heat. You know, these two women here were talking about what a great day this was, and I'm kind of back there going, it's too hot. My Virginia bluebells are blooming right now, but this is not a happy place for them. And for most of these spring ephemerals, that's true. I mean, if we could have a month of 60 degrees and drizzly rain, these guys would just be happy as clams. And the Virginia bluebells too. Oh my gosh. Yes, they are lovely. Do you have this one? Yes. Yes.
In the full sun.
Yes, well, so.
Leaves on the trees.
Pardon?
Because they're not leaves.
That's right. That's right. A lot of these spring woodland ephemerals, what they do is they bloom before the leaves. So they really do need some sun. But what they want is to not be hot. So they end up in these areas where they get sun in the spring when the plant is blooming. And that's basically when the plants need the sun the most, is during their bloom period. And then the leaves come, and it provides a little bit of coolness so that the plant can get a little bit more growth before it dies back to the ground. I mean, when it gets this hot, you just kind of look at these guys and go, they're not going to get to grow because it's too hot for them. So, yeah. And then, in the middle of the summer when there's dense shade there, it doesn't matter to them because they're sleeping. So, shooting star is another one that's an ephemeral. This one will grow in probably more light, or it takes a little bit more heat, though. Mine were not happy today. They were not happy. Limp, oh my goodness. Celandine poppy. This is an example of a plant that is not native into Minnesota. I believe it's native into Iowa. Perhaps on Wisconsin, too. I'm not sure. But it is really a delightful plant. This is not an ephemeral. It has a very long bloom period, which is very nice. It is one that I do cut back sometimes in the heat of the summer because the foliage can get a bit tatty looking. But it's just delightful. And I plant it right next to these blue Jacob's ladder, and they bloom together, and it's just a wonderful combination. So I know that there's other Jacob's ladders that are not native, and there's a lot of them in the trade. I think you could probably find them in any garden center. But this is different. It's the same genus, different species. This guy is pretty low, generally under a foot tall. Again, mine are just beginning to bloom. And they will take considerable shade, and my experience has been a pretty dry shade too, which is nice. And native columbine. This is a really, really, really tough plant. It will grow in sun, shade, wet, dry. It is a seedy devil, but pretty easy to weed out seedlings in the spring. If anybody has questions, throw them out as you get them. okay? Fringed bleeding heart. And this is actually, again, same genus, different species as the large bleeding heart. So it's a dicentra. It probably is even more shade tolerant, I believe, than the large bleeding heart. Tends not to be, unlike the what is it, Dicentra spectabilis, I believe, is the garden one that we're most used to. This can be short-lived, but it is more inclined to self-sow. So you can, usually if you get this and you're smart about seedlings, you can maintain a colony of them. And I think that this is another one that maybe we're just like one state away from its native range, but it's such a nice little shade specimen. And Canadian violet, I'm going to have to, I'll tell you right up front, I love white flowers, probably more than the average gardener. And we have purple violets growing just like crazy all over our place. I never had a white Canadian violet, I saw a friend, I've got childhood memories of this being in the woods in Wisconsin, and so I had to get this Canadian violet. And I thought, well, I don't see a lot of it, so it must not be like real aggressive like that other violet, but oh boy, it sure is, but it's just delightful. And I do love the white, and it actually creates I've got a couple of areas that have been really challenging for me that are shaded, and one of them being particularly dry, and this has just created an amazing dense carpet that blooms beautifully in the spring, and the foliage stays nice and clean for pretty much the season. Jack in the pulpit. Probably not real flowery, but some plants I like to say, they just have a nice architectural interest, I think. These guys will live for a long time, by the way. So now we're moving from maybe more shade to a little bit less shade. This is Golden Alexander. Has anybody gardened with this? It can be a little bit on the weedy side too, but the area where this is being used, it's kind of like at the backdrop of a garden, and before there's a wooded area. It's a nice border plant before a woodland, and it's an early bloomer. Bees love this, and so this is an early nectar source, which I think is really important. It can be seedy. Oh, yeah. So it's in the parsley family, by the way. Parsley or carrot or, dill, that umbel family, all of which provide food for swallowtail larvae. So, does somebody know what swallowtail that is? No, me neither. I think it might be the black one. I don't know. He's molting right there anyway. I know that, but yeah, I found a little patch of last year on some golden Alexanders that I had grown, and what was interesting is I had cut them down. I had harvested seed from them and cut them to the ground, just again to refresh the foliage. And in 10 years of that plant being there, I had never seen swallowtails on them, and people kept telling me, yes, there will be swallowtails on them. And it wasn't until I got that new foliage that I actually ever saw swallowtails on there. I've done a lot of work with monarchs and milkweeds, and one of the things I've learned about them is that if you can have new, fresh foliage on the milkweeds for the monarchs, that's going to be their favorite. So cutting down the plants really has benefits. Appears that maybe there's similar truth with the swallowtails and their foliage. Wild geranium. This can be a rampant plant, but it's very shallow rooted. So it's pretty easy if you don't want, it spreads by rhizomes more so than by self-seeding. So it's pretty easy just to, shovel work will take care of this spreading. Again, a plant that'll do a great job in dry shade, which is, who doesn't need that? Oh, we were already there. Okay. Woodland stonecrop. Again, I think that this is a plant that's native in Iowa, not Wisconsin, but Iowa. So a little bit south of us, but it does quite well here. I've had it growing for at least 10 years. What I like about it is it is a sedum that grows in shade, and it'll grow in, take a considerable amount more moisture than a lot of the sedums will without doing that kind of rot out stuff. And, again, it's white, so it speaks to me. Yep. And Canada anemone. I never even know whether I should include it. Do you have this one?
It goes so wild.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. If you've got acreage that you need to take care of, this might, but it really is. It's just charming when it's in bloom. And it's an anemone, and I have great fondness for the anemones, but this is a pretty rampant plant. So, unless you have an area, I say think of like lily of the valley. Yeah, the house is here, the sidewalk is here, driveway's there, and something else is there. You've got a contained patch that you want covered with something, that would be an excellent choice. I feel the same way about lily of the valley. So, they're both pretty. They're both white. Come on. Solomon's seal. This is a spreader too, but probably not in same league with the anemone. And again, this is a plant that I think has good architecture, just real nice arching form to it. And this is not a very good picture. I love the way these little flowers kind of dangle down along the stem there. And it gets attractive berries in the fall that are kind of bluish. As far as I know, I don't think that birds eat them. I could be wrong. Thimbleweed. This is another anemone. It's tall. This is anemone virginiana, I believe. So it stands at about 2 feet tall. And it just, again, this is a plant that does really well in a tough situation. Dry, not deep shade, but, woodland edge or woodland opening, part sun during the day. It's got a nice grace to it that I like. And grape blue lobelia. Folks know cardinal flower? Does anybody grow cardinal flower here? Yeah, beautiful, beautiful plant. It can be a princess. Do you have good luck with it?
It's about 3 years old now.
Yeah, okay. That's, I think it's not always real long-lived, and it can be very particular about just the right conditions. It is stunning when it's in bloom. This is same genus, different species, so this is Lobelia syphiliticus versus Lobelia cardinalis. Much easier to grow. And it has a lot of the benefits of the cardinal flower. The hummingbirds love this. Yeah. We will now move on to the sunny species. When you talk sun on native species, we're talking about a lot of prairie species, some savanna species. As I mentioned before, they're accustomed to competition for moisture and nutrients, so you want to be careful on how you fertilize and water some of the native plants, particularly the sunny ones. And again, deadheading and pruning can be useful tools, but you have to do this dance between, do I want to take the seed heads off when that's what's feeding the birds that I'm trying to attract to my yard. So I have slowly moved towards, I leave pretty much everything standing in the fall. And the other thing is that just actually the dead foliage itself, often the plant stalks, for example, on the milkweeds, which have hollow stems when they dry up in the fall, those are good nesting cavities for the cavity bees. And then there's a lot of butterflies. There are butterflies that overwinter in various, some as larvae, some as chrysalis, actually some as adult butterflies, and they need debris and cavities and places to hunker down in the winter. And I've taken the license of using that as my excuse to not do anything in the fall garden. So when people come and say, "What, you going to clean up your fall gardens?" And it's like, oh my God, no. Why would I do that? So this has got to be my first sunny species because it's everybody's favorite. There's more than one person in here who has this, isn't there? Butterfly weed? Yeah. This is just a, in the 30 years that I sold plants, I think the only plant I sold more of than butterfly weed was basil. Literally, every year I would tell my husband, he'd walk into the greenhouse and he'd say, "It's half butterfly weed." And I said, it's all going to sell. So, yeah, hush. It's just beautiful. It's in the milkweed family, so it's our larvae host for the monarch butterflies. It's also like all milkweeds. It's an excellent nectar source for a wide array of insects, a wide array. Purple coneflower, ever popular. Interestingly, not native into Minnesota, but, we allow it. This can be a seedy devil, but like I said, the goldfinches, actually several birds really enjoy this. And even after all the seed heads have fallen, the heads have shattered, they're laying on the ground, I'll see the little birds hopping around underneath these plants going after the seeds. I just holler out the window, "Please get them all." White Baptisia. This is my current favorite native plant in Minnesota. It used to be, this is my current favorite native plant. There's just something about it that speaks to me. My pictures on my screen look a lot better than yours. This has the color of the stem is something I can only describe it as smoky purplish gray. And with the white flowers against it, it's just stunning. I also like the fact that this plant is pollinated only by bumblebees because a bumblebee is the only insect strong enough to get into the flower. It's just delightful. Very slow to establish. If you plant these, you can expect to wait 2, 3, 4 years before it ever flowers. Once it's there, it's good for 100 years, so. 4 or 5 feet. Yep.
If you look at the screen behind, can you go back?
No?
If you look at the screen.
Oh, there you go.
It shows a much better picture of the flowers.
Yeah. Oh, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, well. Huh. I kind of look over here and I go, God, mine looks so nice and colorful. These look, no. Okay. We're going this way. There's the white baptisia. This is meadow blazing star. In our marketing days, we used to call this monarch crack. Yeah. I honest to God, I promise you, if you plant this plant, they will come. They will come. This is hands down the favorite nectar plant for monarch butterflies. In my garden, I can have like 20 things blooming that I know are good nectar plants. And if this guy is blooming, every monarch butterfly in the garden will be hovering around. And I mean, like the first little blossom that's getting ready to open, they're fighting over it. Yeah.
Why are some of the other types of blazing star less attractive to monarchs? Do you know that there are
Yes,
some that...
I do know that, yeah.
Okay, what is the reason?
The gentleman wants to know why are the monarchs so attracted to this blazing star versus some of the other ones. I don't know the answer to that. I do have some theories, though. There's the spicata, which is the one that's probably most widely available in the nursery trade. And quite honestly, probably because it stands up better and they've bred shorter cultivars for it. But it's a very tightly packed spike, whereas you notice on this it's more open. And I've noticed there's another one that's Aspera, rough blazing star. The monarchs like that one pretty good too. There's another one called Scariosa that they like pretty good. But and they're all have got this more open form to them. So maybe it's got something to do with that. But I really don't know for sure.
So people really need to watch.
For the meadow blazing star, which sometimes if you go to a nursery, you may pick up the wrong one and not have
Well,
that.
that's why you need to go to this native plant sale.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I can tell you, this is a very tall plant. I've seen it growing in the wild where there's just masses of it, and it's growing with grasses and other things that are holding it up, and it's growing with a lot of competition. I don't know how you grow this in a garden without staking it, quite frankly. It's just too tall, and the flower head is so heavy. I actually plant it against a trellis and tie it to the trellis. Actually, it's a fence panel. So, yeah, I wish that weren't so. And for years, I avoided growing it because it's like, I'm not going to stake one more doggone plant. But here I am staking it. And it's worth it. It's just such a treat when when this is in bloom and the monarchs are playing with it. Yeah, so this is prairie blazing star. This is another native. This is not spicata. This is Pycnostochia. And again, I see monarchs on this, but certainly not to the extent that I see them on the meadow blazing star. Yes, meadow blazing star. That's the one you want. Yep. Actually, this one would attract him too. Prairie smoke. This is just a sweet little thing. Are folks familiar with this? Yeah, this is actually probably more widely available. It's nice. It's low, unlike a lot of the prairie species. So I use it for edging, and it's got a long season of interest. What you're looking at here is, let's see, if we go over here, that's a flower. That is the flower. That's what it looks like. And then this is the seed head, from whence comes the name, prairie smoke, also known as, I think, old man's whiskers or something like that. But because it does these flowers and then it does the smoke, it's got a long season of interest. I mean, between the flowering and the smoke session, I would say, it's got a good 6 weeks that it looks really interesting in the garden. And the foliage stays nice all summer too, which is kind of a plus. Wild petunia. This guy can be seedy, and the seedlings are not easy to get out without a tool because it's got what I call, there's probably a botanical name, but I don't know, like a claw root, kind of like that. It's just impossible to pull even a teeny little seedling out with your fingers. You need to get a shovel on it. This one I do deadhead pretty vigorously because it would eat the garden, basically. But this is really sweet. It blooms, again, it's one that's not so tall. I'm thinking about under 2 feet, maybe even 16 inches. Blooms about midsummer. Attracts lots of pollinators. And, it's a plant of special concern in Minnesota. So it's a good one to plant to make sure that we don't lose it. Sometimes you wonder how these plants that, I've made jokes with people about this plant, like, how did this ever become how did it go away? I mean, it just sows itself everywhere. I have a field road at home that's full of this, and it's one of these plants that you drive over it with the mower, and it kind of goes, damn it, I'm going to flower. And it'll flower at 2 inches high, kind of like a dandelion, sort of. But, it's persistent. But nonetheless, I think huge habitat loss for this guy. So, native bee balm, this one is pretty well known. This is one that definitely don't ever fertilize or water this. It will stand up if growing lean enough. It's a great nectar plant. It's a real nice plant to, I think, plant in large clumps or mass plantings of it. Make a nice statement and attracts more beneficial pollinators. You know, that's actually kind of true of most plants. If you're thinking about planting for pollinators, planting, you know, several of one thing is going to attract attention more than one of this, one of this, one of this, one of this. So if you can get drifts or groups of plants in your garden, that's really going to help.
On that native bee balm, you said don't water. My understanding is that regular Monarda can be grown in kind of a semi-wetland, edge of pond kind of situation, but this can't be.
The question was about growing this dry versus regular Monarda, and I'm going to take issue with that. This is regular Monarda to me. Yeah, the red stuff. Yeah, they're the red, purple, whatever it's been. Yeah, this, again, same genus, different species. This is definitely a dryland species, the red one, which incidentally is native to the East Coast, but just not into Minnesota. That it really thrives in a moist, and it will grow where other things won't grow that are really, you know, because of the wetness.
But this one would not do well there.
I think it would be messy there. It might grow there, but I think it would be messy there. Yeah.
I have a logistic question.
Yes.
I had a lot of bee balm and the red type.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets very tall.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting older and less able. And I'm thinking, what do I do when I deadhead these guys? I mean, I end up with an awful lot of stuff to go in and try to rake up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering how anybody else, they just go in and rake it up, I guess. But I don't know if there's some other way to do it. Or just leave it in their stalks and they...
Yeah. So, you know, I don't rake much in my gardens, but I'll tell you, I do get down on my knees with gloves. Oh, I'm supposed to repeat the question. So, did he get the question? No? Okay. She's asking about managing the red bee balm. And what do you do when you cut it back with all of the plant debris that's you're creating? Yes. You know, I think actually you could leave it if you want. If I were going to do that, though, I would probably do that, maybe be more inclined to cut it back in the fall so it would decay a little bit. I am actually not a person who spends a lot of time raking in my garden. And quite simply, a lot of bare soil makes me nervous. I like the soil to be largely have litter on it because I know it's going to suppress weeds and it's going to conserve moisture. Now, having said that, I should say I live in where I live, I live on a dry, sandy spot, so I'm always thinking about conserving moisture. But you know, So in the spring, for example, right now I'm just finishing cleaning up my gardens. There's only a few spots that I actually take a rake to, but I still can get down on my hands and knees, and I just use gloves and pick out wads where I think it's too heavy. And I like to leave a little bit of organic debris there.
And what do you do with the rhizomes? That they just seem to be, the red rhizomes just seem to be...
Yeah, what do we do about the rhizomes with the Monarda? You know, really the best way to manage a plant like that, it's in the mint family, so it's kind of like the same as the mint. It wants to move. It will literally choke itself out because the root mass becomes too thick. You know, I say get a shovel in there, dig it out, get somebody else to do it. You know, I don't know how you want to approach it. If you just go through your bed and take out half of what's there, put it in the compost pile. If you can't find somebody who wants it, and know that the compost pile is a respectable end for a plant, though it might start growing there too. It is pretty tenacious. You know, I tell people all the time, just take some out and throw it away. Oh, I can't do that. I can't throw plants away. And yes, you can. A compost pile is a very respectable end for a plant. So, yeah, but the roots actually need some thinning down there.
Yes.
You know, I think in nature what happens with those plants sometimes is it starts, I'm thinking about my raspberry plants, okay? It doesn't really want to stay in the same place. It wants to be moving to kind of soil where it's not been before. And then the stuff over here is going to get old and woody and die out, and your better stuff is going to be where it got to move to someplace new. So you have got to kind of either accept that and let it do that, or get in there where it's getting too much root mass, get some of that out of there. Dig a big chunk of roots out, throw it out, put in a shovel full of soil. Then it's got some new space, basically. Yeah, okay. I think I'm supposed to hurry along here. Yep, okay. Sky blue aster. Yeah, asters, great because they're fall. And I'm a monarch person, as I said before. Asters are a great nectar plant, and they bloom late. And when the monarchs need nectar is late because they're making a 2,000+ mile journey to Mexico, they need lots of nectar. So I really encourage asters and goldenrods too. This is a different kind of coreopsis than a lot of us are used to. It's actually a little bit shorter than some of the cultivated coreopsis varieties. Anise hyssop, this is a splendid bee plant if we have any beekeepers out here. Again, this is in the mint family. Doesn't spread so much by rhizomes as some of the other mints does. It will self-sow. I like it because it tends to stand up by itself too. Long bloom period, monarchs like it, bees love it. Nice architecture. Downy wood mint. This is actually kind of a shorter version of the anise hyssop. The flowers are very similar looking. This plant comes in at under 2 feet tall. Blue-eyed grass. Oh, this is so sweet. Does anybody grow this? Yeah? It's just sweet, isn't it? Are yours blooming yet?
Yeah, I just bought them actually.
Oh, okay.
They're already blooming.
Yeah, great. They are sweet. They're spring bloomers, very short, under a foot tall. They've gone kind of wild in a little garden of mine, and they always get commentary when somebody comes and sees them. Yep. Purple prairie clover. Nice little, again, this one is at about 2 feet tall, stands up on its own. Not a great picture even on my screen, but hey, there's a white version too. Again, same genus, different species, but very similar looking. Nice ferny foliage too that I really like. Wild quinine. Again, here's a white plant. I believe that this is threatened in Minnesota. It stands up. It's white. It's got an exceptionally long bloom period for a native plant. Actually, for a perennial in general. Complements many other plants really nicely. Gray-headed coneflower. I think this is one that, it's sometimes called yellow coneflower too. It's a Retibita pinnata. This is one, again, that in a garden situation, if it's too rich, this will have a hard time standing up. But in a gravelly alley, it would be great. Spiderwort. This is spring bloomer, about 2-3 feet tall. This will take a wide range of soil conditions, a little bit of shade. It's got, when you go to cut it, it's got a yucky sap that comes out of it. Is anybody growing this one? Yeah?
My mom saw it one time years ago, and she said, "Oh, that's snotweed."
Snotweed? It will actually leave stains on your skin and stuff. When I work, I collect seeds from this, and my hands will be just strange purple when I'm done from it. I like it a lot, though. It's a great color of blue. Great color of blue. Compass plant, and I don't know why this slide is in here, because this is not one that I would generally recommend for a garden, but it's called the Giant of the Prairie, and it can reach 12 feet tall. The foliage is really beautiful. I know people who grow it just for the foliage, and they grow it in the shade, cut the flower stalks off just because of the foliage. Oh, yeah, and it can live to be 100 years old, too. Yeah. Amazing, huh? Cup plant, cousin to compass plant. This plant can be weedy, but I'll tell you, I've got a patch of it on a hillside behind my house, around the bird feeders, and it's just perfect. It is just perfect because it's tall. The birds perch on it. They eat the seeds. The stems are hollow in the winter, and so, I know there's lots of things that can live in there. And I just love, this is one that the finches will perch on and the wind is blowing it, and you can see the finches riding the flower head. Native lupin. Who grows this? The native one, not the cultivars, the native one. Do you have this?
There's a sample of it in the rain garden by the fire station at Highland Lake. Good example of its all native.
Uh-huh. This thing has bedeviled me for years. I just cannot, I've got some, but it's like, I wanted to think it should be easier than it is. So I have no words of wisdom other than, I think it's breathtakingly beautiful. All those lupins that we see on the roadsides, the pink and purple and white ones, those are not native lupins. Those are garden escapes. The lupin that's native to Minnesota is all blue, and it's not quite as tall, and it has a somewhat different structure, not as erect. It is just charming. Good old black-eyed Susan. This is tough. I consider this an annual or very short-lived perennial. I like to point this out because I think this is often sold as a perennial, and it's not. One season, maybe two. It is sweet, though. Nothing against it. I just like to mention that I think it's kind of misrepresented a lot. Lead plant. This is actually in my garden. This is actually a woody species, so it's a small shrub. Very late to show. Mine are just starting to show foliage now, but I love it when the foliage first comes out. It's kind of just a beautiful silvery cast to it. Comes in at about 2 feet tall. Does real well and very, very drought tolerant. You could plant this on your boulevard and it would be there 50 years later. Loving it. Yep. And then a couple of grasses. I just included two here. My two favorites are prairie dropseed and little blue stem. I wish I've certainly seen better looking dropseed than this. It has kind of that fountain grass form to it. And another thing about it that's a little unique about it is that most of the warm season prairie grasses are very slow to emerge. Like none of the little blue stem is really, it's just starting to come out of the ground. The prairie dropseed probably comes in front of it by about 2 to 3 weeks. So it's under 2 feet. It's under 2. Probably if you held the blades up straight, it might be 2.5 feet, but because of that form, it's not that tall. And then the seed heads maybe spray up a little bit higher than that. And the seed heads are wonderfully fragrant. If you, when it's got seed heads on it, if you just go and brush it, people say buttered popcorn. I kind of don't get that, but I like the smell. How's that? And then little blue stem. Yeah, there's little blue stem with some Joe Pye. And again, this little blue stem is definitely a plant that's going to look the best in a dry, sunny situation. Too rich, too moist, not enough sun, it's going to flop on you. Oh, I do have another one, a sedge, ivory sedge. This is a sweet little sedge. A lot of people are familiar with the oak sedge or pen sedge, which is a nice kind of ground covery thing that you can use in fairly shaded areas. This also grows in shaded areas that are dry. It's more of a clumper, though, than the pen sedge is runs a little bit more freely. Okay, now I'm just going to, I know I'm out of time now, so I'm just going to go through, I have a series of pictures here that are just of people's gardens, combinations. Everything in this garden setting is a native plant. Here we have a native, these, I think, yeah, these are all the same gardens. There's a couple of milkweeds. We've got the butterfly weed that we spoke of, swamp milkweed in the back. Probably my second favorite native plant, just because it has so much utility. It's a milkweed. It's in my gardens, the monarch caterpillars definitely prefer the swamp milkweed over the butterfly weed, and it's easier to grow, and it grows faster. I think this again is we're still at. Yep. This is the picture that I showed you at the beginning of the talk, the woman with the boulevard garden, and I said had no lawn in her yard. This is behind her house next to the garage. Let's see, we've got some Pallas purple heuchera in here, which is kind of pushing the definition of what's a native plant. But I again want to make the point about if you're going to garden where there's a fair amount of shade, I think it really is useful to think about color and texture and architecture. I just think this is really a nice setting. This is that shot we saw before it's cut down. Includes a little bit of her yard there too. There's a backyard. There's the cup plants that we talked about that are so bird friendly back there. It's also an example of, I think, of, using some, signage or architectural features. We looked at back here, I think we had. I really like this one with the bird. This garden is really pretty with the bird bath sitting in it, with a lot of different grasses around it. I think, swamp milkweed, monarch caterpillars. This is probably my plug for the milkweed section. I am a milkweed maven, yes. Every property should have a piece of milkweed on it, every single property. And if you can't do the common milkweed, there's good choices. There's a sheet back there to educate you on them. This is swamp milkweed, common milkweed. Must have been doing bugs that day. This is actually, what is this plant? God. This is elderberry, which is a native shrub. And then this is rattlesnake master. Really like this guy too, with an eastern blue. This is a tall plant at about 4 or 5 feet tall. That's my number 2 grandson, Levi, who was a budding entomologist when he was about 8. Now he's about 12 and he's a skateboarder instead of an entomologist. That's my closing, yeah. Do we have questions? Yes.
So I started experimenting with some moss. Do you have any guidance on developing moss patches in the garden or the yard?
I do not. I can tell you that I have moss that grows. Oh, the question was about growing mosses. And if I had any guidance or information, I do not. The mosses tend to kind of scare me because I have them growing in places where they're eating wood structure. And so I let them go where I think that they like high lime, moisture, semi-shade. Does that kind of help? And kind of shunning the mosses, I should say. I'm pretty fascinated recently with lichens. Kind of developed a love relationship with lichens. But mosses I'm not so familiar with. That's a great question, though. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for growing milkweed from seed?
Yeah, I have a whole presentation on it. Do you know how to stratify seeds? Okay. Get that Prairie Moon catalog. Or you can actually even go online to their website, and they're going to have a section for you telling you what you have to do to get seeds that require stratification. That means you have to take it through a kind of a simulated winter. They need a cold, moist period. So what I do is I take the seeds, I pack them with some just barely damp silica sand, and you can use peat moss, you can use other materials. I use silica sand because it's light colored and I can see the seeds in there. I put them in the refrigerator for, it might be a month. Milkweeds are mostly a month. Other plants might be 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. Some, you have to do that twice too, but milkweeds usually 30 days in the fridge in damp sand, and then take them out and plant them.
And what I tried last year was we've got milkweeds in our front garden.
Mm-hmm.
Saved some of the pods with the milkweed.
Yep.
Put them in a paper bag, left them on the garage over the winter, and tried to plant them in the spring, and I planted probably 4 or 5 dozen of them, little
Uh-huh.
starters.
Uh-huh.
Not a single one came up.
Not a single one germinated. That's not that is not stratification. That's freezing them. That's refrigerating. They need to be think like a seed, okay? That seed falls to the ground, it goes down to the ground, it gets snowed on, it's cold, it's damp. And it's like that until spring comes. And the plants have evolved so that they do that so that they don't germinate like when they fall down on the ground in September. If they were to germinate then, they're only going to be a teeny little thing before winter sets in. So stratification, yeah. Or you could just go Google stratification native seeds. There's a ton of information out there. Yes.
Last year, I moved to a place that has a wetlands pond and that buffer zone between our lawn, and it's quite wide. And I've already planted some swamp milkweed in there,
Good for you.
and some the iris, the native iris that grows.
One of the
in-
flags.
Flag iris, yeah, thanks. And I'm struggling with what I can. I've been watching the sun pattern. It gets sun and then shade and then sun again, and I'm just. Do you have any suggestions for what I might?
So the
plant?
question is, do I have a suggestion for a shoreland, wetland buffer area?
Yeah.
So pretty wet conditions, yeah.
Yes.
Joe Pye. There's, what is it? It's called Queen of the Prairie. Philipendula, Philipendula. You might look at some of the, there are some nice sedges that grow in wetland areas too. I think it sounds like it would be a tough situation to just have solid flowers. The sedges are,
Yeah, it's actually got a lot of growth in it, and goldenrod's one of them. So there are a lot of things, and I'm kind of trying to plant between things, not being sure exactly what everything is.
do you know what your goldenrod is?
I don't. Haven't been there long enough to
Okay.
figure it all out.
Okay, very good.
But I heard what you said about the goldenrod.
The Canadian, there's
Canadian.
actually, there's several types of goldenrods that are native to Minnesota. I mean, we could do a whole talk just on goldenrods. There is one Canadian goldenrod which I actually shun,
Okay.
and that would be Canadian goldenrod. And if that was, an area that I was trying to make into a planting, I would probably try to get rid of it. I have 2 10-acre prairies, and I eradicate it from my prairies because it will become a monoculture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So I went to the Friends plant sale last week and couldn't help myself buying a Shoei lady slipper. Any suggestions? I haven't planted it yet.
No.
Don't.
What? No, I have no recommendations
Oh
at
my
all.
God, I already have it.
She wanted recommendations on how to grow showy lady slippers. I mean, over the years, I've been asked for it dozens of times, and usually what I tell people is I wouldn't recommend that you even buy it. Not because there's anything unethical about it, but I think you're going to have your heart broken. That's what I think.
Orchids usually do that to me,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Can I ask what you paid for it?
Now I paid $40.
Oh, that's not really too bad, to tell you the truth.
Oh, okay.
That's really not too bad. So here's what I tell people. So you have some plants like Canadian goldenrod and dandelion. The range of acceptable conditions for them, infinite. Absolutely infinite. You can grow it anywhere. And then, you get other things like, roses might be kind of down in here. Orchids, you can't even see it. I mean, the lady slippers, no. Your conditions need to be pretty much perfect. It needs to be moist. It needs to be cool. It needs to be sunny. Yeah, so it might be on the edge of something. I don't know. I think they like, and they don't like it really, they like a moist soil, but not a real heavy soil. So like a moist, sandy soil in sun and cool. So I saw a stunning patch of them once on Highway 2 going from Baudette to International Falls. Yep.
Are there any other questions?
Okay, thank you. And everybody has to take one of those cell flyers back there.
Gladly. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Try to get a little something.
My other classmates.